I'm Maya Collins, 29 years old, and 4 years ago, my parents gave my sister Laya $80,000 to study abroad in Paris. They told me I didn't deserve any help. No explanation, no apology, just a cold statement that I was unworthy. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I walked away silently and built my life from scratch. Line by line of code, paycheck by paycheck, I made something of myself, all while being told I'd never be enough. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated and had to prove your worth. Growing up, it was clear who the favorite was. That was Laya. She was a year older than me, with blonde hair and a smile that seemed to light up every room. Everyone adored her. In high school, she was the captain of the cheerleading squad, voted homecoming queen, and the girl who always had the spotlight. As for me, I was the one in the corner, the girl with messy hair and a love for coding. I spent my afternoons in the robotics club building things no one else cared about. While Laya had everyone's attention, I was lucky if my parents noticed when I brought home a new project or learned something new in class. It wasn't just at school, it was at home too. Every family photo was the same Laya in the center, glowing like she was the only one who mattered. I was always pushed to the edge, my face barely visible behind someone else's shoulder. The conversations, they always revolved around her latest cheer competition or some award she'd won. Whenever I tried to bring up my coding ideas, my mother would cut me off with a sigh and say, "Can't you talk about something normal for once?" On my 18th birthday, Laya received a shiny new car from our parents, a refurbished Honda Civic. The whole neighborhood came over to celebrate her. Meanwhile, I stood on the porch holding my only gift, a green bus pass, and a lecture from my father about responsibility. It wasn't lost on me that the only thing I ever seemed to receive from them was criticism. When it was time for college, Laya went off to a state school with their full support. My parents threw her a party bragging about her future, her trip to Paris. Me, I started at community college, no fanfare, no new clothes, just a reminder from my mother, if you choose to leave, don't expect us to help you. So I worked double shifts, days at a cafe, nights at an IT help desk, and saved enough to buy a secondhand laptop for my classes. I learned early that nothing was going to be handed to me. I didn't hate them, or at least I tried not to. I kept telling myself that love doesn't always have to be equal. But as the years went by, the feeling of being erased, of never being enough, became a part of me. When I did manage to achieve something, a third-place coding award, an internship offer, my mother's response was always the same. "That's nice, but can't you learn to communicate like Laya?" I wanted to scream, but I stayed quiet. I knew better than to expect recognition. And then when Laya got accepted into the study abroad program in Paris, my parents threw a farewell dinner. I sat in the corner watching her talk about her life in France, her excitement over her apartment, the people she'd meet. My mother, glowing with pride, spoke of how fortunate Laya was, how proud she was to be sending her daughter to Paris. It was too much. It hurt too much. I finally asked in a quiet voice, "Could you lend me $2,000 for my dorm deposit, or at least help me with some programming textbooks? They're expensive." My mother didn't hesitate. She cut me off immediately, her voice icy. "You don't deserve any help," she said. The room went still. I wanted to scream to demand why, but I said nothing. My father then chimed in, explaining that Laya was the one they had invested in, the one with potential. I wasn't worth the investment. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about how they saw me, how they valued me. They had chosen Laya. They had invested in her not just financially but emotionally. To them, I was the liability, the mistake, the one who would never live up to the image they had of their perfect family. As my parents continued discussing Laya's future in Paris, I sat there, my heart pounding. I thought about all the nights I'd worked to survive, all the sacrifices I'd made just to keep going. But none of that mattered to them. I wasn't the child they wanted. They'd invested in Laya, and I was nothing more than a mistake they couldn't erase. It was in that moment that I realized something important. This wasn't just about money. This was about worth, and I was done fighting for theirs. I quietly pushed my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the floor felt like the only sound in the room. "I understand," I said, my voice low. "Thank you for being clear." I walked away, leaving my family behind in their perfect bubble. Before I left, my mother called out, "Don't be dramatic, Maya. You always love playing the victim." But I didn't turn back. As I stepped outside into the rain, I felt cold. But there were no tears, just silence. And in that silence, I found my decision. I didn't hear from my parents after I left. At first, I thought the silence would be a relief, but the emptiness in my apartment began to echo. It wasn't just the physical space that felt barren. It was the loneliness that crept in whenever I allowed myself to think about what had happened. That night, after walking out on my family, I didn't feel the rage I'd expected. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, like the final remnants of hope had drained out of me. I had always thought love was unconditional, but I had learned that some people only show affection when it suits them. And in their eyes, I had never suited them. I threw myself into my work. It became my world. By day, I worked as a part-time IT assistant at a small tech startup troubleshooting anything from printers to databases. By night, I studied code, worked on projects, and planned my future, all the while telling myself it didn't matter that they'd never be proud of me. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. Slowly over time, the weight of my childhood began to settle less heavy, but more constant, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Despite everything, there were moments I couldn't ignore, like when I would visit the local cafe, the one just down the street from my apartment. The barista, a guy named Jason, always greeted me with a smile. It was a small kindness, but it made me realize how little I had received from my family. He didn't have to say anything to make me feel like I mattered, but in his simple acknowledgement, he did. Those moments, however brief, reminded me of a life I wanted to live, one where I didn't need to fight for scraps of love. My sister Leia, on the other hand, was doing exactly what my parents had always dreamed. I saw her face on billboards, her photo in magazines. Her life seemed so different from mine, but there was always that feeling in the pit of my stomach, that familiar ache of comparison. I couldn't help but feel like I had been pushed aside for someone who had done everything by the book. Leia was the family's perfect daughter, the one who was always celebrated. I kept tabs on her through social media, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't seem to stop myself. It was hard not to, especially when my parents posted endless updates about her life. It seemed like they were always so proud of her, sharing her successes, her accomplishments, her travels. I'd seen her post pictures of herself in Paris, attending exclusive events and sitting in cafes with a glass of wine in hand. Every picture painted the image of a woman who had it all, and I couldn't help but wonder, why wasn't I enough? It was difficult not to feel invisible in a family like mine. Growing up, I had always been the second choice, the afterthought. No matter how much I tried to excel to stand out, there was always someone else who would take the center stage. I would sit in the background watching Leia get all the attention. She was everything my parents wanted, and I was always just there. I never realized how deeply it would affect me until I grew older and started seeing the pattern more clearly. My own sense of self-worth had always been tied to their approval, to their love. But I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep chasing something that would never come. It hit me one evening when I saw Leia's latest post. She had just graduated from university and was heading off to Paris to study abroad. My parents couldn't stop talking about it. Leia was their dream, realized, their shining star. I had heard them boast about her achievements over dinner so many times, and each time I had smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. But when Leia posted her photo in front of the Eiffel Tower, it was the final straw. I wasn't angry with her. I was angry at myself for allowing myself to feel so small for so long. I sat in my small apartment that night staring at my computer screen, wondering if this was my future, working menial jobs to scrape by, never truly succeeding in anything, never being enough. It felt like I was stuck in a loop, unable to break free from the image they had created of me. The truth is, I had never really known what it was like to feel loved for who I was. Love in my family was conditional. My mother would always talk about Leia as if she was the epitome of success, and my father would nod along, agreeing that everything she did was perfect. But me, I was just the one who kept to herself. I wasn't the cheerleader, the popular girl, or the one with the big dreams. I wasn't the one that would make them proud. At least that's how they made me feel. There were moments when I wanted to pick up the phone and call them just to hear their voices again, just to hear them say they were proud of me, even if it was too late. But every time I thought about doing that, I remembered their words. "You don't deserve any help." It was like a knife that stuck with me, even when I tried to move on. I couldn't reach out to them. I couldn't keep waiting for something that wasn't ever going to happen. I remember the day I decided I couldn't do it anymore. It was a Friday. I had just finished my shift at the cafe and was walking home when I saw a family of 4 sitting outside a restaurant, laughing and talking. They looked so happy, so complete. It was the kind of thing I had always wanted, a family that supported each other, a family that cared. But it wasn't mine, and I realized in that moment I didn't need them to complete me. I could do it on my own. But that realization didn't make things easier. In fact, it made everything feel even more complicated. I had spent so many years trying to fit into their idea of success, and now I had to build my own idea of what success meant. I didn't have a blueprint. I didn't have anyone to tell me what was the right way. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was time to stop looking for their approval. Maybe it was time to find my own path. As I sat there staring out at the city, I realized the road ahead was going to be long. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I knew I had to do this on my own. I had to find my way no matter what. And as I thought about the life I was about to build, I knew something else too. It wasn't just about making a name for myself. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than what they had made me believe. But that was just the beginning. What happened next would prove to be even harder, and I had no idea what I was about to face. The days after I walked away from my family were oddly quiet. I expected them to chase after me to apologize, but there was nothing. My phone stayed silent, and the air around me seemed to still, as if the whole world was waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. I kept waiting for a sign that maybe, just maybe, they would reach out. But after a while, the waiting became exhausting. I stopped expecting anything from them. I threw myself into work. By day, I was an IT assistant at a small tech company. By night, I studied code and worked on personal projects trying to catch up on the years I'd spent feeling invisible. I knew I had to do this alone. It wasn't just about getting away from my family. It was about proving I could build something without their help. The quiet in my apartment felt suffocating at times, but I pushed through it, focusing on the task at hand. The loneliness was there always, just beneath the surface, but it wasn't going to stop me. I'd spent so many years living in the shadows of their expectations, always trying to prove myself to be seen. But now I had the freedom to build my own life, even if it was small at first. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, staring at the lines of code on my laptop screen. The city was quiet outside my window, the only sound the steady hum of my laptop. The rain started to fall, the familiar Seattle drizzle that always seemed to make everything feel a little more real. I found myself feeling strangely calm in those moments. Maybe it was because I was finally doing something for me. There was no one around to tell me I wasn't good enough, no one to compare me to Leia or tell me I wasn't living up to their expectations. It was just me and my work, and in a way that felt like the first time I had truly been free. But the silence wasn't easy to ignore. There were times when I'd be sitting at a cafe trying to focus on my code when the thought of my family would creep in. My mother's voice would echo in my head, telling me I didn't deserve help. The words felt sharp, and I couldn't shake them. I'd try to concentrate, but the hurt from that night, the night I'd walked away, lingered like an open wound that wouldn't heal. I tried to keep busy to stay focused on my career. I kept telling myself that all I needed was a laptop, a stable job, and the determination to succeed. But there were nights when it felt like too much. I'd sit on my small couch, scrolling through social media, seeing Leia's posts from Paris, and I'd wonder if I'd made the right choice. She was living the dream that I had once imagined for myself. She was the one who had everything. But I wasn't jealous of her. I was just tired of feeling like I was always on the outside. It wasn't until I met Dr. Tessa Monroe that things began to shift for me. I'd been avoiding therapy for years, but something inside me knew it was time to talk to someone. I walked into Dr. Monroe's office, a small, quiet space tucked away in the corner of the university district, and sat down in the chair across from her. She was calm, composed, and had a way of listening that made me feel like I wasn't just talking to a therapist, but to someone who truly understood. Dr. Monroe didn't ask me to share details about my family right away. Instead, she asked me, "How did you feel when it happened?" And that simple question sent me spiraling. I hadn't really allowed myself to feel the depth of the pain I'd been carrying around for so long. I'd buried it under all the work, the distractions, the quiet rebellion against my family. But now in her office, it all came rushing back. I wasn't just angry with them, I was hurt. I was devastated that I'd never been good enough in their eyes. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Monroe helped me put words to the things I'd always felt but never understood. She talked about emotional invalidation, about how my family had made me question my own worth. Every time my mother had dismissed me, told me I was being too sensitive or too difficult, it was a form of gaslighting. I had internalized all of it, convinced myself that I was the problem. But Dr. Monroe explained that it wasn't me. It was them. And slowly, I began to see things differently. One day, after a particularly difficult session, Dr. Monroe said something that stuck with me. Many parents use money as a language of power. They don't refuse because they don't have it. They refuse because they want you to know who gets to decide your worth. Those words hit me hard. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. Suddenly, everything my parents had done, everything they had said, made sense. They had used money, affection, and approval as a way to control me, to keep me small, to make me feel like I needed their permission to exist. That realization was both freeing and painful. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that their favoritism, their conditional love was just a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. They had chosen Laya, and in doing so, they had made me feel invisible. And somehow I had spent my whole life believing that I deserved to be invisible. But now I knew better. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to stop living for them. I had to start living for me. And that meant making some difficult choices. It meant accepting that I wasn't going to get what I needed from them, no matter how much I wanted it. But it also meant that I didn't need them to define my worth anymore. As I sat with Dr. Monroe in the weeks that followed, I began to understand what I had to do. I had to let go of the idea that their approval was what I needed to be happy. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight. But with each session, with each moment of clarity, I was building a new version of myself. One that didn't rely on anyone else to tell me I was enough. And while I still had moments of doubt, I knew this was the path I needed to take. I had to keep moving forward. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time I felt like I was in control of it. I knew I had changed when I started to feel something different when I looked in the mirror. It wasn't a physical change, but something deep inside of me, something I hadn't noticed before. I wasn't the same person who walked out of my family's house that night. I had taken steps forward, but they were small, quiet steps. No grand gestures, just a soft shift in how I saw myself. It wasn't just about getting away from them, though. I'd learned that much from Dr. Monroe. It was about finally understanding that I didn't need their approval, that I could stand on my own 2 feet and build a life without having to keep proving my worth to anyone, especially them. But while I was learning to build my own sense of self-worth, something inside me kept asking, what now? I didn't know how to answer that question, so I just kept going. I went to work, went home, and started making plans. I'd set out on this path on my own, and it was finally starting to make sense. Slowly, I was finding the space to breathe without constantly holding my breath, waiting for their judgment. And even if I hadn't yet figured out what to do with all the freedom I'd claimed, I knew it was mine now. But even as I began to feel more like myself, life had a funny way of reminding me of the past. I was sitting in the small office I'd set up in my apartment one evening reviewing code when my phone buzzed. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. It was my mother. I let it ring a few times before hitting the silent button. It wasn't like I was angry anymore. I wasn't even upset. It just felt like an old song that didn't mean anything to me anymore. That song was my mother's voice, her voice that always made me feel like I was never enough. And for the first time, I didn't need to hear it. I didn't need to know what she wanted or why she wanted it. The following days passed in much the same way, quieter, more peaceful, but still, there was always that lingering question, was I enough? One evening after work, I was walking back to my apartment when I bumped into Ethan, my colleague from work. He had that calm, steady presence about him, the kind of person you could rely on without thinking twice. He had been an anchor at the office, someone who always seemed to know what to do when things went wrong. We talked about work, about how the new delivery system was working out, but somehow the conversation slipped into something more personal. "You know, Maya," he said, his voice soft but direct. "I've been noticing something. You seem different lately." I wasn't sure how to respond. For a second I thought maybe he was going to say something about how I was quieter or more withdrawn, but instead he smiled slightly and continued, "You seem more at ease. Like you're not trying to prove anything to anyone anymore." I wasn't sure how to answer him. I had never really considered myself the type to constantly be trying to prove something. But as the words settled, I realized he was right. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just living. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of all those expectations. We stood there for a while in that quiet moment, and something inside me shifted again. This wasn't just about not needing my family's approval. It was about learning how to exist without needing anyone else's validation. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. Not my parents, not Leah, and certainly not anyone else. It was a feeling I couldn't describe, not entirely, but it was there like a quiet hum underneath everything. Later that night, as I sat on my couch sipping tea and staring out at the city, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. I didn't need to prove anything to myself either. I was finally seeing myself for who I was, not who I was expected to be. The weeks that followed felt like a series of small, steady wins. I didn't make any grand gestures, no bold moves that would turn everything upside down. I just started living one quiet day at a time without worrying about who noticed or what they thought. But something else was happening too. Slowly, I was making space for my own success. At work, things were starting to take off. The project I'd been working on, Wayfinder Labs, had been picking up traction. Arjun, the lead engineer, had been pushing for us to move it from a side project to something more substantial. I hadn't really believed it could happen, not at first, but now with each passing day the dream was becoming a reality. Arjun was persistent, and one afternoon he sat me down to talk. "Maya, I think we're ready," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "It's time to pitch this to the board. I believe in it. I believe in you." I wasn't sure what to say at first. My mind flashed back to the years of doubting myself, to all those moments when I thought I wasn't good enough. But then as I looked at Arjun, I realized that this wasn't about the past anymore. This was about what we could build now, what I could build now. "We're ready," I said quietly, and I meant it. For the first time, I wasn't worried about failing. I wasn't worried about what would happen if I didn't make it. I was just ready. That night after our meeting, I couldn't sleep. The excitement buzzed in my chest, but it wasn't the usual kind of nervous energy I had when I was preparing for something important. This was different. This was confidence. Confidence that I could do this, that I had finally found my place. And for the first time, I realized I had done it on my own. But there was still a part of me that wasn't fully convinced. Even though I felt like I had come a long way, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more I needed to understand, something I had to prove. And I knew deep down that this wasn't just about getting my family to see me for who I truly was. It was about understanding myself. And so I kept moving forward. But there was still something in the back of my mind, something that wouldn't let me rest. Something I knew I'd have to face sooner or later. It wasn't long before they started calling again. At first, it was just my mother. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the underlying tension in it. "Maya, we need to talk." I didn't respond. I just let the voicemail sit in my inbox, the message flashing unheard. For days I debated whether or not to call back. But each time I picked up my phone, my finger hovered over the number before I set it down again. I was done being their emotional punching bag. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. The calls kept coming, though. my father, then my aunt, then distant relatives, each one with a similar message. "We're worried about Laya. She's struggling," and then almost as if it were an afterthought, "We miss you." The irony of it all, how they never reached out when I needed them, but now that Leia was struggling, they were suddenly concerned about me. But I wasn't the same person anymore. One afternoon, after a particularly long day at work, I saw yet another missed call from my mother. This time a text followed. "Maya, we need to talk. Leia's in trouble. Please call us." For a moment I stared at the screen, my thumb itching to respond. But I didn't. I walked into my office, sat at my desk, and stared out the window. It was quiet. There was something peaceful about that silence, something that reminded me of how much I had grown. When I left, I'd been angry, hurt, but now I could see it clearly. My family wasn't the safety net I had once thought it was. They weren't the ones who had my back. They were just people who knew how to make me feel small, and I didn't need to keep allowing that. The next morning I called Arjun at work. "We need to talk," I said when he answered, his voice full of concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I replied. "But it's time. Time to make things official. Time to pitch Wayfinder to the board." We had been talking about it for months, but I had always hesitated. There was always that lingering voice in the back of my mind that told me I wasn't ready. But now, with everything I had learned about myself, I realized that I had to make a choice. This was my moment. This was my chance to prove to myself that I could do this on my own. Arjun agreed without hesitation. "I'll help you. We'll make it happen," he said. And just like that, everything shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was taking control of my future. As the days went by, I started preparing for the pitch. Every night after work, I'd go over the data, refine our presentation, and make sure everything was perfect. There were moments when the old doubts crept in, but they didn't have the same power over me anymore. I had a purpose now. I was building something real, something that was mine. A week before the pitch, Arjun and I stayed late at the office. We sat across from each other at the conference table, reviewing the numbers one last time. "This is it," Arjun said, leaning back in his chair. "We've worked hard for this. You've worked hard for this." I nodded. It felt strange hearing someone else acknowledge my work. For so long, I had been the one to downplay my achievements, hiding them away because I didn't want to seem too proud. But now, for the first time, I realized that I had earned this. I had worked for every success, and I didn't need anyone's permission to take credit for it. The morning of the pitch arrived, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when everything aligned, and I knew what I had to do. I arrived at the boardroom with Arjun, my heart steady, my mind focused. We walked in, set up our presentation, and waited for the board members to arrive. When the meeting started, my nerves were gone. I spoke clearly, confidently about Wayfinder, about the algorithm we had built, and how it could change the way small businesses manage their deliveries. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble over my words. I just spoke like I had practiced 1,000 times. And for the first time, I realized something else. I wasn't just pitching an idea. I was pitching myself. The room was silent when I finished. I glanced at Arjun, who gave me a small nod, and then the board members started asking questions. They were impressed, but I could see that they weren't fully convinced yet. So I did what I knew best. I told them the truth. I told them that this wasn't just about building a product. It was about proving that the people who were always overlooked, always told they weren't good enough, could succeed. "This isn't just about cutting costs," I said. "It's about giving people like me a chance to show that we can make a difference. I've been told my whole life that I'm not worth the investment, but here I am asking you to take a chance on me." The room went quiet again. I could see the shift in their faces. It wasn't just about the product anymore. It was about the person behind it. They saw me. For the first time, they really saw me. By the end of the meeting, the board had agreed to move forward with Wayfinder. We had the green light. I couldn't believe it. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb everything that had just happened. It felt surreal, like I had been holding my breath for so long, and now finally I could exhale. But even in that moment of triumph, I knew something wasn't quite settled. As excited as I was about the future, I still hadn't dealt with my past. I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do about my family. That night after the meeting, I found myself staring at my phone again. Another voicemail from my mother. The message was short. "Maya, we need to talk. Please call us." I didn't listen to it. Instead, I set my phone down on the counter, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. There were still pieces of my past that needed to be put in place, and I knew it was time to face them. I still remember the day the offer came through. It was a typical Seattle afternoon, the clouds hanging low, the sound of rain against the window, the kind of quiet I had come to love. I was at the office going over some final adjustments to the Wayfinder presentation when I saw the email notification flash on my screen. My heart skipped. The subject line was Simple Wayfinder Labs, Investment Confirmation. I clicked it. I didn't know what to expect, but as I read through the email, it hit me this was real. The investors had approved the funding. Wayfinder Labs was officially moving forward. I could hardly process it at first. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or just sit there in stunned silence. I had worked for this moment, but it felt surreal to see it finally come to fruition. Arjun was the first person I told. I found him in the break room grabbing coffee. "We got the funding," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes widened, and then he smiled a huge, genuine smile that lit up his face. "I knew we would," he said. "I told you. You've earned this." His words felt like a lifeline. All that hard work, those late nights, all of it had led to this. I still wasn't sure what it meant for me, though. I had spent so many years just trying to survive, trying to prove I was capable of something. But now I realized it wasn't just about survival anymore. This was my success, my achievement. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me I was good enough. I knew I was. But as much as I wanted to feel proud, I also couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was missing. Yes, I had achieved something incredible, but my family still wasn't part of this. They didn't see me for what I had become, and that thought lingered even as I tried to focus on the exciting new chapter I was stepping into. A few days after receiving the offer, I was at my desk late one evening when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Laya. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since I'd cut off contact with the family. The message was simple, just a few words. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her or them again. But another part of me, the part that had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, knew that I couldn't keep running from it. I took a deep breath and texted back, "I'm here." "What's going on?" The message came through almost immediately. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For how things went with us. I was wrong. I see that now. I read the message twice, then set my phone down. It was unexpected. I had never heard Leia speak to me like that. She was always the one who seemed to have it all together, the one my parents praised while I was left on the sidelines. But now she was apologizing, and I didn't know what to do with that. After a long pause, I typed back, "I'm not sure what to say." Leia replied almost instantly, "I understand. But Maya, you need to know I never meant to hurt you. I always thought you'd be fine, that you didn't need me. I see now that I was wrong. I didn't know how to respond to that. I hadn't expected any of this, especially not from her. Leia and I had always been so different, so disconnected, even as sisters. It was hard to imagine what she was feeling now after all these years. She had always been the golden child, the one who got everything she wanted. And here she was telling me she was sorry. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her. Not yet. But I also couldn't deny that something inside me shifted when I read her words. For the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Maybe we could build something different, even if it wasn't what I had expected. The next few days were a whirlwind. Wayfinder was officially funded, and Arjun and I started assembling the team. I had to pinch myself to remind myself that this was real. Everything was moving so quickly, faster than I could keep up. And yet I felt a sense of calm, a sense of peace that I had never known before. It was the kind of peace I had always sought but never found in my family. They had always been about appearances, about what looked good to others. But now I was building something that mattered, something that was truly mine. I didn't need their approval to know that what I was doing was worth something. As for Leia, we kept texting. She didn't push me for anything. She just kept saying she was sorry and that she understood if I didn't want to talk right now. It felt strange, to be honest. After everything, I wasn't sure if I should believe her. But part of me couldn't help but hope that maybe this was the beginning of something different. Maybe, finally, we could be sisters. A few weeks later, Arjun and I were at a meeting with the rest of the team discussing the future of Wayfinder. We were all excited. There was real momentum now. It was everything I had worked for. And when I looked around at the team we had built, I realized something. These were the people who believed in me. They were the ones who saw me for who I was, not what I could do for them. But as the meeting wrapped up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from my mother. I had deleted her number months ago, but somehow she had found a way to reach me. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to do. I knew in that moment that I wasn't ready to pick up the phone. I wasn't ready to go back to that life, to that family. But I also knew that sooner or later, I'd have to face them. And when that time came, I would be ready. It had been nearly 2 months since I cut ties with my family, and my life felt completely different. The moment I'd feared, the moment I'd thought would tear me apart, had come and gone. But somehow I felt stronger. My business was growing, the team was thriving, and I had finally started to feel like I was where I was supposed to be. But that lingering question was still there. What happens next? The answer came in an unexpected way. I was at the office late one Friday finishing up the last details for an upcoming pitch when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name. For a moment I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure. The last time I'd heard from her, I'd cut the conversation short. I hadn't heard from her since, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what she had to say. But I couldn't avoid it forever. I tapped the screen and answered, "Maya, I don't know what to say." My mother's voice trembled, a stark contrast to the confident tone she usually had. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix things between us, but I want to try." I sat back in my chair, staring out the window. It was dark outside, but the city lights shimmered in the distance, and the rain began to fall soft and steady. I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me was still angry, still hurt, but there was also a part of me that just wanted to move on. I didn't want to keep holding on to the past. "I'm listening," I said quietly, my voice almost soft. She let out a breath, like she had been holding it in for so long. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Maya, about how I treated you. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing by pushing you, but I see now that I was wrong. I wasn't there for you when you needed me most." The words hung in the air between us. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be. But as I listened to her, something shifted in me. I hadn't expected an apology. I hadn't expected her to admit that she had failed me, but she had. And hearing her admit it was the first step towards something different. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said, my voice steady, but not harsh. "But I hear you, and I need you to understand that what you said to me, what you did to me, it's not something I can just forget, but I'm willing to work through it." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice quiet. "I understand. I just want you to know that I love you, and I'm here if you ever want to talk." And just like that, the weight I had been carrying for so long began to lift. I wasn't sure what the future held, or if this would be the start of a new chapter, but it felt like something had finally broken free inside of me. After I ended the call, I sat there for a while, letting the silence settle around me. For so long, I had been convinced that I needed my family's approval to feel like I was enough. But now for the first time, I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was enough. I wasn't sure how things would go from here, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had the freedom to choose. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about building the life I wanted on my terms. The next day, I met with Arjun to discuss the next phase of our startup. The funding was officially secured and we were ready to move forward. As we sat down to review the business plan, I felt a new sense of clarity. This was my path, and it had nothing to do with the past. I was building something that mattered, something that could change the future. As we went over the numbers, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come, not just in business, but in my personal life. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living, and for the first time I realized that I had the power to shape my future. Later that day, I received another call, this time from Leia. I had been expecting it. After all, things were shifting in our family, and I knew she was probably reaching out because of the conversation with our mother. "Maya, hey," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I heard about the funding. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Her words caught me off guard. It wasn't that I hadn't expected something like this from her. It was just that hearing her say it after everything felt like a validation I didn't know I needed. I appreciate that, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "It's been a long road." There was a slight pause before she spoke again. "I know. And I want you to know, Maya, that I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything. And I want to try and make things right, too." I felt the tension in my chest ease, but it wasn't quite the resolution I had expected. It was different now, more complicated, and I knew it would take time. But I also knew that we were both changing. We weren't the same people we had been before, and that was okay. "I don't know what that looks like," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to talk. Maybe we can figure it out." Leia was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I hope we can." As the conversation ended, I felt a small sense of peace settle over me. Things weren't perfect, and I wasn't sure what the future would hold. But I was finally in control of my own life. And as the days passed, I kept moving forward, building my business, rebuilding my relationships, and most importantly, building a life that was mine. But even as I stepped into this new future, I knew there was more ahead. There was still the unfinished business with my parents, and that I knew would be the next test. I had thought for so long that forgiveness would come easily once things fell into place. That once I found success, once I proved myself, I would finally feel at peace with the past. But it wasn't like that. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in small, quiet moments. And it wasn't about my family accepting me or even understanding me. It was about me accepting myself. The phone call I had with my parents, the one where I finally told them I wasn't going to return to that same cycle of hurt and expectation, was one I'd been avoiding for years. But it wasn't as difficult as I imagined. I wasn't angry when I called them. I wasn't resentful. I was clear, calm, and maybe for the first time, I was speaking for me. "Maya, we just don't understand." My father had set his voice flat, but there was an edge of something else underneath it. I could hear the frustration, the old pattern of wanting control over the narrative. And for a moment, it almost made me want to go back to that familiar place where I had to explain myself to them. But I didn't. "I understand," I said. "And that's exactly why I have to keep moving forward. I can't go back to the way things were, not for anyone. I've worked hard for everything I've built. I'm proud of what I've done, and I'm proud of who I've become." It was hard to say those words, to claim something so deeply personal, but the moment I said them, I felt something shift inside me. For so many years, I had been stuck trying to earn approval I would never get. But now I was choosing my own path. No more apologies. No more explanations. Just the quiet power of knowing I was enough. The next few weeks were a blur. Wayfinder Labs was officially up and running, and our team was growing. The momentum was unstoppable. But it wasn't the success I had dreamed of for so long that brought me peace. It was the quiet certainty that I had done it on my own terms. And that made all the difference. I don't remember the exact moment it happened, but somewhere along the way, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped measuring my worth by the standards of people who had never truly seen me. And in doing so, I found something better. Not just success, but freedom. The freedom to be me. Leia called again a few weeks after that. Her voice was softer this time, less guarded. "Maya, I want you to know, I've been thinking a lot, and I see now how much I've hurt you. I'm sorry for everything." Her apology was different than I expected. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't about what she had done wrong, but about her acknowledging what I had been through. And as much as I wanted to say that it was too late, part of me knew it wasn't. It wasn't about the past. It was about the present. And in that moment, I realized we were both trying to move forward, even if we weren't sure how to do it together. "I'm not sure what happens next, Leia," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to try if you are." She didn't say much after that. We didn't need to talk about the past. We didn't need to explain ourselves anymore. There was a kind of peace in that silence, a kind of understanding. We were both moving forward in our own ways, and maybe that was enough. In the weeks that followed, my life continued to evolve. My relationship with Ethan deepened, and the work at Wayfinder grew. But more than that, I felt a shift in how I saw myself. I had spent so many years telling myself that I wasn't enough. I had believed that if I just worked harder, if I just did more, I could finally be worthy of love, approval, success. But now I knew better. I didn't need anyone's approval to know that I was enough. I had already proved that to myself. And for the first time, I realized that I could live my life without waiting for anyone's permission. That night, after a long day at work, I sat by the lake near my house, watching the ripples on the water. I could feel the cool breeze against my skin, the soft whisper of the city beyond. I had a moment of clarity, a sense of peace that washed over me. I had come full circle. From that girl who had once felt invisible to the woman who now stood in her own light, proud of every step she'd taken. The rain started to fall again, gentle and steady. I watched the drops ripple across the lake, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like I was chasing something or waiting for something to happen. I had everything I needed right here. And as I sat there, a quiet thought settled in my mind. This is what it feels like to finally be free. I think that's the thing we all need to remember. We don't need anyone to tell us we're worth something. We don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. The only person who can define our worth is ourselves. And once we realize that there's no limit to what we can do. So to anyone who's ever felt like they're not enough, like they have to keep chasing approval or love, remember this: you're already enough. You always have been. And with that, you can finally breathe.